So I actually saw this clip and wanted to put out a quick little video talking about this. So this is from Donovan Sharp, one of the people that I do follow, and of course Kevin Samuels, someone else that I do follow. And it's this sort of same sort of silly shaming sort of language that gets utilized, kind of gets passed around because everybody kind of wants to distinguish themselves from MGTOWs. And the MGTOW just stands for men going their own way, right? It's just a mindset. You've chosen not to, in essence, conform to much of societal norms, which typically revolves around dating, getting married, having kids, cohabitating, etc. Right? So instead of going that route, men have opted to not go that way. They've decided to do their own thing, to enjoy being single. Back in the days, they were called the confirmed bachelors, and before that, they were probably called something else. And of course, society has always either referred to them as gay, homosexuals. There was something wrong with you, etc., because you weren't married, you didn't have a girlfriend, so maybe you were on a down low, etc. Of course, we hear some of this very similar language, and Kevin Samuels in this video makes this point.
Patrice O'Neal said, "You're a fish. You can't tell me how to catch you."
Right.
See, the bottom line is women like to believe one thing because that's the media. That's what they've been programmed to, because that's what sells products. Show me a competitive MGTOW in the real world.
Right.
Show me a CEO, vice president. Show me a guy who's going to the CEO club with top in sales. Show me a person who's performing at a high level in the real world who claims to be a MGTOW.
And that's basically the point, is the last point that he makes, which is that claims to be a MGTOW. And of course, because deciding to be a confirmed bachelor has typically had such a negative connotation, especially when it comes into business. Most of these businessmen are married and have been through the ringer numerous times. You've seen guys that have been married 2 or 3 times, and from most of our perspective, we were like, why would you go right back to getting married after you've had your money stolen from you from the court system, right? Why would you go and do that again? And it's because most of these type of men are actually weak. They're too weak to say, no, I'm not going to get married. And instead they opt to conform. And so if you realize that the marriage deal, especially in a Western country, I mean, in other countries, there was a recent article where the guy was divorced like 20 years, and then his ex-wife came back because she was on hard times, and she ended up getting money from him because now he was wealthy. He went his own way, started his own business, eventually got with somebody else, and 20 years later, this woman comes out of the woodwork and says, give me money, and the courts say, yeah, sure, why not? And that's exactly what many modern men aren't interested in. The other point that is talked about showing me a CEO who is in one of these spaces where a man who has chosen to go his own way is competitive. It's important to understand that most men don't need a lot when it comes to living. Like most men don't need these huge mansions, fancy cars, etc. To find enjoyment out of life. Like Jesus said, the life doesn't result from the things that you possess, right? Possessions don't necessarily make you any happier. So for most men, you can live a very simple life, especially if you've opted to stay single. You stay single, you don't have kids. Kids are a huge drain on your pocket. So are women, because there's the endless need of wants that come with being a married individual. And especially once you have kids, those wants start to increase between clothing, private school, college, etc., right? Buying a bigger home, buying another car, buying cars for the kids, taking them, day camps, all these, special things that, the wife wants to go through, going on vacation, etc. And now as the man, you're typically paying for all this. So of course, most of these men have to go out there and earn more resources, because more resources are required as a result of taking on added responsibility. Now, back in the days, that added responsibility came with the benefit of being responsible as the family head. That has been removed today, especially today, from the typical family. The government can take over control of your whole family the moment, as Coach Greg Adams says, the moment she says, I'm not happy, it's a wrap. So why would you opt to go that way, especially in a Western country. You're just literally rolling the dice. And so for me, I mean, even though I earn a six-figure salary, well above a six-figure salary, but I don't live like it. I live very modestly. I grew up poor. And so I've always, and for the most part, I've saved my money or I've invested my money. But at the end of the day, if I make 200,000 a year, what's my motivation for me to go out and earn $500,000? For what? Just to say that I did? Most of the time, most of these individuals who end up starting something, they go out with the desire to start their own business. For the most part, most white men, overwhelmingly, statistically, have a hard time finding a job, especially because of allowing Hispanics, blacks, and whites into workspaces. There's numerous times where white American men have been pushed out of the job market. As a result of being pushed out in the job market, they end up making their own. They end up having to start their own business. It wasn't because they made this choice be out of a desire. Overwhelmingly, when you look at the statistics, it's just because in the terms of the workspace, overwhelmingly white men get pushed out. Right? Look at the attack now on most white men about being less white, about being privileged, or etc., things of that nature, right? So for most of those men who can't get the job that they want, who can't get the education that they want because they get pushed out due to diversity hires or diversity within education, and allowing either minorities or women to take up the space that typically might be taken up by a white man, he's automatically excluded because he's white. And overwhelmingly, when you look at most CEOs today, they're mostly white, predominantly white, not because they wanted to be these big CEOs and they had this dream. For the most part, many of these men often couldn't get the jobs that they want. They couldn't conform. Look at Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a perfect example of someone who really couldn't conform, didn't have really that big of an education. And there's been numerous examples of this, of individuals who just basically started their own thing and it just ended up being successful. Typically, when you do something for a long period of time, you get good at it, and eventually you will find a measure of success. That's just a reality of how life is. To sit here and say that, well, since such individuals don't say, hey, my name is Xavier and I'm a MGTOW and I'm a CEO, nobody would do that, especially because it has such a negative connotation of why would you not want to get married and have kids? And in most of these spaces, misery tends to love company, right? Which is why you see a lot of these men who are married wanting you to get married. But then if you actually ask them, you're like, hey, would you do it again? Most of them say, fuck no. I remember I had a patient. I was having a discussion with one of the female nurses about why I have chosen not to get married and why I don't go that route. And she was talking to the patient. I went in to give her a hand, and it was an elderly black man. He was there by himself. And he was like, because she saw the wedding ring on his finger, and she was like, oh, look, see, he's married. And she asked him, how long you been married? And he was like 30, 40 years, etc. And then I straightforwardly asked him, would you do it again? And he said, fuck no. He literally said, fuck no, I would not do it again. And overwhelmingly, from my experience, when I've asked men, would you do it again? Most of them say no. Most of them at the beginning, they were like, oh, I did it for kids, or, they were interested in the woman and she wanted to get married, and they conformed. They got broken down and they conformed, right? I mean, Donovan Sharp is a perfect example, right? Of falling into the trap of living with a woman, right? Of living with a woman, assuming all of the risks. And if it goes sideways, that's his choice, right? It's his choice to do that. For people who choose not to go that route, especially if you're an individual who does earn a good salary, who has his own company, you don't need to. You talk about, for example, Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio has overwhelmingly, society has looked at him and be like, why haven't you got married? It's because he knows the risk, right? He knows the risk of being a very wealthy celebrity and going that route. And most of the women he knows that are after him are typically gold diggers. They're typically women who are just, looking for a high status man. And when you're in that crowd, that's who you find. From his experience, he's decided not to get married. And there's been, look at what's his name? Henry Cavill. He stated the exact same thing, that the dating market is shit. He has absolutely no intentions of getting married. Is he going to go out and say he's a MGTOW? I mean, look at his career now. Just literally from having dated, what's her name? Gina Carano. That he's already been canceled. This is the society in the West. And it's why many of these successful men are just opting to go their own way. It's by no means worth it. If you have the desire to have a long-term relationship, overwhelmingly, I would say pick another country, hands down. Hands down, pick another country. You're more than likely going to live in like some second or third world country. That's just a reality. If you plan on living anywhere in the West, there is absolutely no reason to have a relationship, especially if you're going to be successful, because by nature, you're going to have to go out and earn more resources. So you're typically, as a man, you're going to, which is what men are designed for, about gathering resources. And it's just going to happen by nature of you being a man and by having the responsibility of having a family. You're going to want to go out there and push yourself to earn more so that you have more resources for your family. It just happens by nature.